Chapter 31, Act 31, The Heir's Tale. Act 31, The Heir's Tale. The White Reflection. Harley nodded grimly as she half listened to Luca's introductions of the rest of the folks hidden away in the hull of the Falcon. Her gaze drifted first from Porum's still form, and then to her black mage brother, who was half sprawled in his bed, his jaw clenched mid-nightmare. Harley had not seen them in years, and made Luca repeat herself when she had rattled off the twins' names. It seemed impossible that they had grown up so much in such a short time. She found herself daydreaming fondly of the day she had first met them at Damcyan's reconstruction ceremony. They had only been 6 years old, the size of precocious dolls, and had been identical in every way except for their strikingly opposite personalities. Her life had been very difficult at that time. On a personal level, she was still reeling from the first anniversary of her parents' shocking deaths, and coming up on her first full year of uprooting her peaceful Troyan existence to work for King Edward, whose project to rebuild Damcyan had been more challenging than she could have ever imagined. But on that beautiful summer day, when Edward's friends from the world over had come to see the accumulation of her hard work, seemingly endless tears, and long nights of dreaming and planning, every ounce of her effort had been rewarded when she saw the gleam of pride shining in his eyes. For the first time since she had met him, Harley had been able to witness Edward hold his head high and finally feel as if he belonged on the same level as the others, even if they had never thought otherwise. And getting to meet the people who had inspired Edward on a daily basis had been as much a delight for Harley as it had been for him. It had filled her heart with an enchanting fervor knowing that they had all been through hell and back together, and still cared for one another as intensely as they had during the war. Next to Palom was a young woman Luca had introduced as Leonora, although Harley thought she had picked up the strange quiver in Luca's voice when she had said the girl's name. Like the twins, Leonora was out cold, but Harley recognized her attire as that of a trainee of the Troyan Epops. Had they met under better circumstances, she would have been thrilled to converse with someone from the place she had always thought of as her second hometown, even though she had now officially lived in Damcyan longer than she had in either Capo or Troia. What happened to them? Harley nodded toward the 3 bedridden mages, and Luca sighed. Cain, the mysterious girl who has been hunting the crystals, and the Eidolons are what happened. I'm afraid the Eidolons haven't gone easy on the regions they've been stalking, Gekau said. It seems that once the mysterious girl got what she wanted, she left them to their own devices. But without their true master's voice to guide them, they've gone totally berserk. I see, Harley chewed on her lower lip, frowning. Well, in that case, I may have a clue on where to find your next Eidolon. What? Rydia had stepped into the stateroom, the shadows under her eyes now more pronounced than ever. The news that the last of the crystals were truly lost to them now had shaken loose yet more despair in her heart. The last time that had happened, the planet had been, quite memorably, razed by the giant of Babel. What fresh hell would be waiting for them this time if they were to make it to Baron? Harley whirled around to face her, her cheeks tinging. She didn't like it to look as if she had been keeping anything from them, especially after Edge had been willing to let her tag along. Sorry, Rydia, it's just something that came to mind as Luca was getting me up to speed. When the meteor storm hit, there were many villagers from Capo who fled for the castle to take shelter. A few of them told me that as the meteors came down, Capo was invaded by monsters, relentless waves of them. Oh my gods, Rydia paled, pressing her hand to her chest. Why Capo? They have no crystal. We spared what we could of the guard to investigate, Harley sighed. But none of them had returned by the time you reached Damcyan. The good news is that the villagers didn't say the monsters were openly aggressive, yet. The bad news was that some of them told me the timing of the monsters coincided a bit too conveniently with some strangers that made their way into town, and one of them was definitely a girl. The mysterious girl, Rydia cried. And perhaps one of her cohorts. Maybe Cain. My father did say she controlled an army of monsters when she attacked our crystal, Luca frowned. This sounds like her calling card. Rydia stared anxiously at the map hanging behind Harley, her fingers twitching. We still need our rematch with Titan and Agart, not to mention we've seen no sign of Odin, Azura, Leviathan, Bahamut, or the Mist Dragon. Could one of them really be hiding in Capo? Before she could stop herself, she let escape a quiet whimper. How will we ever find them all in time? Every minute that passes, the crystals grow further from our reach. We could split up, Gekau shrugged. Even without an airship, we of the Eblin 4 can manage just fine. No. Edge had stomped down the stairs, gingerly brushing Rydia aside as he barged in. Splitting up is not an option. We've only just now found each other again, and we've all seen what that witch is capable of. If one of us finds an Eidolon without Rydia... He trailed off, shaking his head.
It doesn't seem likely we'd survive the encounter.
Edge. Rydia protested, but only half-heartedly. She knew every word he spoke was true. She couldn't guarantee his friend's safety if they struck out on their own. Hell, she couldn't even guarantee her own.
What do you want to do, Rydia?
Izayoi asked. She was sitting on a bed next to Porum, her eyebrows raised.
What does your gut tell you?
Rydia slumped against the map on the wall, staring up at the ceiling.
I've been hoping, praying, that my mother might provide me more guidance to help complete this mission. But I've heard nothing since we left Mist. I don't want more people to get hurt, but it seems like no matter where we go, that just keeps happening.
She gazed over at Porum, Palom, and Leonora, her eyes darkening.
You've got to trust yourself, Rydia.
Luca threw her arms around her, squeezing tightly.
It's all thanks to you that we've gotten back 3 Eidolons so far, and we can get the rest, too. If the mysterious girl really is in Capo, she might have some of them with her.
You're right, Rydia replied, sinking against Luca and closing her eyes as she finally hugged her back.
Plus, you must be worried too, huh, Harley? Isn't Capo where you grew up?
Yes, Harley blinked. She really remembered such an insignificant detail about me that I don't even recall telling her. Lady Rydia, your heart really is too kind. I can only imagine what this hunt for your Eidolons is doing to you on the inside.
I do admit to being a little worried with my lord not being around to tend to Capo during this crisis, but my concern continues to lie with helping you succeed in your mission to infiltrate Baron. Then let's go to Capo.
Rydia smiled laboriously.
We won't turn our backs on anyone that needs help, that's not what King Edward would want, right? And if the mysterious girl is there, I'll smack some sense into her myself.
Baron. You can't beat him. Theodore's heartbeat punctuated each word as he warily took in his approaching father, whose blade was inching closer with every step he took down the stairs. In mere moments, Cecil would be right in Theodore's face, the boy would be able to see the fog of his breath on the Ragnarok before it was run through him. He's one of the strongest knights of the realm, no, on the entire planet. You're just a rookie Red Wing, and you have no control over the light you've been gifted, not like he does. You'll be no good to anyone dead, you need to think of something else. So Theodore quietly lowered his broadsword to his side, and Cecil paused mid-step, the fury encircling his eyes replaced by a brief flicker of relief.
Well done, my son. I always knew I could rely on you. Is that really true, father?
Theodore asked softly, and Cecil smirked, suddenly lunging forward and grabbing Theodore by his scarf, lifting him from the ground. Theodore gasped for air as the fibers of the fabric wrapped around his throat, particles of white and black bleeding into the view of his father lifting him higher and higher. He could feel the fire building in his lungs, the deeper he tried to inhale, the higher the flames licked up his chest.
Theodore!
Rosa screamed, and Theodore felt something powerful jolt through his body as the scarf loosened and he was released, falling toward the floor as the rest of his vision was devoured by darkness. Cain dove forward to catch him with a grunt, the scramble of footsteps closing in behind them. Theodore could make out the distinct sound of a struggle, someone was being wrestled to the ground, and the echo of a slap reverberated in the air.
Rosa!
Sid cried.
Mother!
Theodore whimpered, his last mote of consciousness fading away as he slumped against Cain's chest. Meanwhile, Rosa had been quickly overpowered by Cecil, whom she had tackled to free their son. Cecil had managed to roll on top of her, pinning her hips as he raised his fist in the air. Rosa winced and covered her face with her hands, her scream caught in her throat. Sid and Edward rushed toward him, but were thrown back by a curtain of golden light that set their nerve endings aflame with stun-inducing vibrations.
Ah, so you are serious?
Cecil smiled.
Then allow me to repay the favor.
He uncurled the fingers in his raised fist, a blinding light rupturing from the center of the barrier that had been erected around him and Rosa. The ground beneath their feet began to quake, the sound of thundering hooves surrounding them as the light gave way to a heavy fog. Cain bowed his head, narrowing his eyes as he pulled Theodore closer into his chest. He could feel the whispers of a powerful incantation on the tip of his tongue, effervescent warmth flooding his body that he had never felt in all of his 38 years. Wake up, Theodore. You have to wake up. He could picture it in his mind as easily as if it were unfurling before him, Theodore bathed in holy light, the kiss of fluttering phoenix down sinking into his skin as the light suddenly flooded his gaze once more, crystalline blue eyes snapping to attention while a ravenous rush of breath shook his form back to life. Raise. A shrieking whinny sent Kane's mind reeling as he snapped out of the throes of the spell. Standing next to Cecil, shrouded in the now dying fog, sat a warrior upon a silver steed with a jet-black mane. He was encased in platinum-plated armor, with the exception of a golden mask that hid his face, crimson orbs appearing where his eyes should have been. Forked, twisting horns emerged from his helmet, a flowing midnight blue cape dragging on the floor behind him. In one hand, he held a massive steel scimitar the size of a child, and with the other, he clung to the horse's reins, not even flinching as the beast reared up on its hind legs and let out another ear-shattering cry. Rosa had dared to open her eyes, wondering what was taking Cecil so long to strike her. When her gaze fell upon Cecil's new ally, she felt as if she had been dropped in the middle of a nightmare, the color drained from her face as she took in Cecil's unmitigated delight in the turn of the tide.
Odin. But how?
Upon landing in Capo, it did not take long for the truth behind the monster invasion to become apparent to Rydia and the others. At Edge's staunch insistence, Harley had stayed behind on the ship, so she was not able to play tour guide, but in lieu of a friendly face greeting them as they made their way through the village's main drag, they were instead welcomed by another seizing, shrieking tribe of sylphs fluttering overhead. There were not nearly as many as had taken over the courtyard in Fabul, but there were certainly enough to keep the majority of the residents off the streets for fear of being dive-bombed or going deaf from their obnoxious cries.
The sylphs were the monsters that came in with the meteor shower.
Rydia groaned, once again clapping her hands over her ears to block out the incessant wailing of the fairies.
What in the world could have brought them here in Fabul? Maybe they're looking for the mysterious girl,
the man in black replied.
We should check out the inn, and see if she's hiding out there.
He felt odd even suggesting it, but surely there wasn't that many places in a backwater village like this where a stranger could take refuge while Eidolons took over the town. Perhaps something had happened that had made her go into hiding. Maybe that witch finally ran out of bodies. They crossed the street to the inn, which thankfully was not locked. They half expected to be barred out of every building in town, just as they had in Mysidia and Mist. Rydia strode up to the counter, ignoring the wary glares of the villagers who had ducked inside for a drink or 10 to drown out everything happening outside.
Excuse me.
Rydia tapped the counter, and the innkeeper stood up from where he had been stashing away a sack of gill on the shelves below.
We're agents of King Edward's secretary. We were sent to investigate the sylphs and the meteor storm.
The lie rolled off of her tongue a little too easily. It unsettled her that she was getting good at this, and she thought once more of Cecil's lies about Rosa and Theodore.
Is that what those horrible things are called?
The innkeeper smirked, shaking his head.
They have rotten timing, coming right in the middle of our annual flower festival. All of the tourists fled. Has anyone been hurt? No, just annoyed, mostly. The meteors, for the most part, avoided the village. We have a few damaged houses, but nothing that can't be fixed. It probably won't matter, seeing as how I'm fairly sure we're all going to die thanks to the return of the moon. That's positive thinking,
Rydia sighed, pressing her fingers to her forehead. She was glad she was the one talking, and not Edge. He would have reached over the counter at this point and throttled the guy out of pure impatience.
Secretary Harley was informed that some suspicious characters made their way into town. Are they still here?
The innkeeper frowned.
Haven't had any strangers check in here, not since all the festival goers left.
He gestured toward the crowd gathered around the bar and the common areas.
I know all these folks. Although I did hear that there were some people who were found washed up at the harbor, nearly drowned, a man and a young woman. If they weren't well, they were probably taken to Nick and Mayaka's place on the northeast side of town. They had a bed that just freed up. Harley was laid up there just the other day herself with desert fever, you know. You're kidding.
Luca blinked, muttering to herself.
Desert fever puts you on your deathbed, right? What kind of crazy person just jumps into a situation like this when they've just about died?
Someone who has to be as insane as Harley to willingly deal with her normal everyday duties of keeping King Edward from dreaming away his kingdom, Rydia thought. She loved Edward with all of her heart, but she held no illusions about what it had to have been like to work for the man. He was an idealist, through and through, and that made Harley the yang to his yin in every way possible. To the innkeeper, she gave a megawatt smile that almost disguised how deflated she felt inside.
Thanks for your help.
They retreated back outside into the swell of fairies, and Rydia pointed up the street toward a taupe-bricked home just a few yards south of the oasis the town had been built around.
The house he was referring to is up there. How do you know?
Edge blinked.
You come to Capo often?
Rydia shook her head.
Not exactly, no. But...
You had said it yourself, Edge. The past is repeating, the clock rewinding to 17 years prior. And back then. She could recall the memory clear as day. She had been begging Cecil to let them stop for a drink at the pub while they debated what their next move would be to escape Baron, but he had refused her, citing their lack of money. Being 7 at the time, she had decided to take the situation into her own hands and had knocked on a stranger's door to beg. By a sick twist of fate, they had discovered the strangers were nursing Rosa, who had succumbed to desert fever searching for Cecil after rumors had made their way back to Baron that he and Kane had died in Mist. They had only been together a short period of time, but that had consisted of Mist burning to the ground, Titan tearing the mountains asunder in an effort to expel him from the village, and being attacked in the middle of the night by his own men when he had refused to give Rydia up to them. And even through all of that, Rydia had not seen even a fraction of the fear in Cecil's eyes that she had witnessed when he stared at Rosa in her would-be deathbed, watching helplessly as she faded by the minute and whimpered his name. Being a child, she had no way of truly comprehending what she was seeing at the time, but somewhere deep inside the recesses of her heart, she had made the connection that was watching a man in love crumble before her eyes, like a tragic version of the prince in the fairy tales her mother always read to her. That Cecil is still here. He has to be. This all has to be a terrible misunderstanding. They made their way to the house, Rydia's hand only hesitating for a moment before rapping her knuckles against the wooden door. She could practically see her child self standing before her, pounding her fists insistently on the bottom panel of the door, which was all she had been able to reach as a little girl. It swung open, and they were greeted by a woman that Rydia didn't recognize. She winced as the shriek of the sylphs invaded her eardrums, but offered Rydia a tired smile.
Can I help you, dear? We were told you are taking care of some travelers that might have fallen ill.
Oh, the woman blinked.
Yes, that's right. A man and a girl, he carried the poor thing all the way here and collapsed at the village gates.
She crossed her arms over her chest.
Seems to be happening a lot as of late. Must be the rowdiness that comes every year with the flower festival. Anyway, do you know them?
Rydia realized that she hadn't quite thought through just exactly what would happen if it was the mysterious girl and one of her minions holed up inside, and felt her legs wobble in consternation.
Yes,
Edge intervened when she hesitated to answer. She glared up at him, but said nothing.
We're here to take them off your hands.
Edge. Rydia wanted to scream. Are you insane? If it's the mysterious girl, do you really think she'll just let us waltz out of here without blowing up the entire house? We've got to get these people out of here. Golbez watched the panic bloom across Rydia's face, and cleared his throat, thankful that his Lunarian intuition was finally kicking in when it was actually needed. He supposed 17 years of not using it made you a little rusty.
I hate to intrude, but I lost something at the oasis, Golbez said. Is your husband home to help me look for it? It would go faster if there were 2 sets of eyes searching while these 3 attend to our friends.
Luca and Edge shot the man in black a confused stare, but Rydia's eyes widened in hopefulness. The woman tucked a lock of stray hair behind her ear.
My husband isn't home right now, he's helping a friend board up one of their windows that shattered in the storm. Could I help you instead? Then I won't be in the way.
She turned to Edge, frowning.
Your friend is rather large. Are the 3 of you going to be enough to carry him and the girl out?
Large. Rydia blanched. Oh gods. It really could be Kane. He was as tall as a tree. She wasn't sure what she would do if she actually came face to face with the scoundrel, especially after seeing what he had done to poor Porum, but she was pretty sure she had narrowed her options down to either crying or running for her life. Edge assured her that they would be fine, and she and the man in black left for the oasis. As soon as they were out of earshot, Rydia whirled around, her face red.
Thank God he had the foresight to realize that if our enemy is upstairs that these poor people might be in danger. Hey.
Edge held up his hands.
If you wanted to be the sole black mage in this fight, I have no issues with that. I've been trying to get rid of him this whole time anyway. Idiot.
Rydia hissed, stomping inside the house.
Think before you speak next time. You guys.
Luca winced as she followed them up the stairs.
You're getting ahead of yourselves. We don't even know who's up there, or if they are awake.
Going off of her memory from her last visit to the house with Cecil, Rydia turned down a narrow hallway and pushed open a door that had been left ajar. 2 beds were pressed against the northern wall, both filled with people-sized lumps that were covered in blankets. Upon stepping inside, Rydia realized the room was freezing. Without the light of the sun, the deserts that surrounded Capo had quickly submerged into the same temperatures you would have during a Baronian winter. Swallowing the lump that had formed in her throat, Rydia cautiously approached the first bed, a cluster of sylphs clawing at the nearby window with their pointed nails, sending an involuntary chill down her spine. As she gently pulled back the sheets, she felt her heart drop into her stomach and the blood rush from all her limbs straight into her head.
Yang.
Yang, his blonde braids splayed over the pillows and sheets beneath him, and his face white as snow, stirred only slightly when Rydia removed his coverings, his blue lips cracking as he whispered.
Door. Sula.
Luca turned to the other bed, only the slightest hint of a blonde curl poking out of the side as she tugged the sheets down and revealed Princess Ursula of Fabul, one half of her pigtailed hair still held together by a fraying ribbon, the other exploding off the side of her head in a riot of curls. Although her clothes were tattered and water-stained, a beautiful silk rose headband remained firmly planted on her head, although a few of the petals were missing. Like Yang, she had no reaction to Luca's unveiling, her skin the same ghastly white as his with dark bruises set under both her eyes.
So it was these two all along,
Rydia murmured, her eyes watering with tears of relief.
They must have never made it to Baron.
She felt Edge's hand brush over her hip, and nearly whirled around to smack him in the face, wondering what the hell he could be thinking at a delicate time like this. He jumped back quickly, revealing the frying pan Sheila had gifted them that he had untied from her waist. Rydia's mouth opened to protest, but she couldn't find her words as Edge lifted the pan high in the air.
Hope this does the trick,
Edge grinned, and Luca looked up from Ursula's still form, letting out a gasp that sucked all of the air out of the room.
Who? What are you?
Rydia covered her eyes as the frying pan crashed upon Yang's shiny head, and Luca let out a strangled scream somewhere in the distance. Edge let the pan clatter to the floor, a low moan drifting out of Yang as Rydia heard the bed shift beneath his weight.
Oomph. Come on, Sheila, let me sleep a little longer.
Rydia peeked between her fingers, watching incredulously as Yang's eyes fluttered open. She threw her arms around him before she could stop herself, sobbing into his broad, freshly shaved chest as he tried to stifle the urge to wince under the slip of a girl.
Yang. My God, I can't believe you're really here. This is just ludicrous.
Luca ceded, and Edge laughed nervously.
Sorry, Luca. It was one of those things better left unexplained. You would have stopped me if you had known what was happening, right? Of course.
Luca shrieked.
Because you're insane. Rydia.
Edge. Yang exclaimed, patting Rydia on the shoulder so that she would get off of him. It felt like she weighed 1,000 pounds when she clung to his ruptured muscles. He spotted Luca glaring at the two of them, and smiled.
And Luca too. You and Sheila are quite the couple, you know that.
Edge shook his head, kicking the frying pan across the floor so that Yang could see it from the bed.
I bet I could learn a lot of tricks from you too.
The connotation of Edge's compliment flew right over Yang's head as he briefly eyed the frying pan. He then immediately snapped upward in bed, like he had been yanked up by a puppeteer's strings.
Ursula. Where's Ursula? The last thing I remember is pulling her out of the ocean. Don't worry. She's right next to you.
Rydia said gently, and Yang grasped Rydia's hand.
Do not fret over me. You need to wake up Ursula.
Rydia and Edge turned toward the other bed, where Luca was waiting dutifully. Rydia gently ran her hand over Ursula's cold cheek, a fresh wave of tears rushing to her eyes as the girl's clammy skin decompressed beneath her fingers. She didn't look like a tenacious maiden on the brink of 16, more like a corpse that had been left to blight in a shallow pond.
Ursula. This is Yang's daughter.
Edge tilted his head.
She's really grown up.
Rydia sank to her knees next to Ursula's bed, shaking her head. She was so distraught that she didn't even hear Edge's comment. Under normal circumstances, something like that would have earned him a beating.
She looks so pale and gaunt. Something must be done. And fast. What happened to you guys? Our ship was attacked.
Yang cried, throwing the rest of his covers off and attempting to swing his legs over the side of the bed.
By Erg.
Rydia lowered her head. He didn't need to finish. She knew exactly what he was going to say next. It had happened 17 years ago, too.
Don't overexert yourself, Yang.
Ursula mumbled into her pillow, her eyeballs darting erratically beneath the thin, stretched flesh of her pale pink lids.
She's moving.
Luca looked to Edge and Rydia, scrunching up her nose.
Does this mean you have to?
Edge scratched his head, the color draining from his face.
Hey, Rydia, can you help me deal with this? I don't have the nerve to hit a lady.
There's also the small detail of having her hulk of a father within striking distance of my neck.
Really? That's where you draw the line in your debauchery.
Rydia muttered, but as she did so, her fingers deftly untied the ladle hanging at her hip. Still kneeling at Ursula's side, Rydia clutched the ladle shakily, her mouth feeling as if it had been stuffed with cotton balls. She reached out with her free hand, gently removing Ursula's pretty headband and resting it on her torso before she brought the ladle into the air.
Crack.
Rydia's scream died in her throat, closing her eyes just before the sickening sound of metal meeting skull rang out. Luca and Edge both clenched their eyes shut, and Yang anxiously perched at the side of his bed. A few seconds later, Ursula woke up, her lips twisting as she stared dizzily up at the ceiling.
Oh, Mother. Is Father out training again? Ursula.
Yang gasped, and Rydia scrambled out of the way just in time for Yang to launch himself off of the bed and come crashing over. Ursula grasped the misplaced headband in her fingers, smiling crookedly as she turned to face him.
Father. I'm so glad you're all right. I knew you would be, though. The Lord of the Seas has nothing on you. A mother's love triumphs over all, hey.
Edge grinned, and Luca shook her head.
What the heck is up with this family? You're all barbarians, and I'm the one who grew up with an axe instead of a rattle.
Nobody replied to Luca's sarcasm. The room had fallen into a comfortable silence as everyone quietly reveled in the small victory of friends surviving to face another day. Rydia lifted her head, realizing that the ear-splitting scratching at the windows had also stopped. A glimmer of light erupted over Yang's shoulder, and a sylph manifested before them, daintily perching herself between Yang and Ursula. Another sylph fluttered next to Ursula's bed, gingerly picking up her headband and nestling it down into her curls as Ursula turned to gaze up at her, eyes wide.
The sylphs.
Yang exclaimed.
But you look different from before in the crater. You look whole again. Yang.
The sylph perched on his shoulder reached over, running her hand down the curve of his jaw. Her hand was so tiny that it felt like the brush of a feather.
You were willing to risk your life for the sake of your child. As much as it pains me to say it, you are a far stronger man than any of us Fae. We've always thought of humans as weak, and that was why they needed the power of the Eidolons,
the sylph floating next to Ursula said.
A covenant we felt was foolish, and would be the downfall of our plane of existence. But you faced the king of the Eidolons himself with not a mote of fear, also that you could save your daughter's life, with no one's strength but your own. You.
Rydia gasped, and the sylph next to Yang wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her rosy cheek to his skin.
Thanks to you, we have finally returned to normal, that girl holds no sway over us any longer. For now, both of you must rest. We will gladly lend you our powers while you grow strong again. Thank you, my sylphs.
Yang beamed, and she turned and fluttered to Rydia, extending her tiny hand. Rydia reached out with one finger, brushing the fairy's palm.
Rydia, forgive us for not heeding your call as agreed upon 17 years prior. Before the madness took us, we had a fearful premonition that Yang and the crystals were in danger. But we were too late, we used the last of our will to cross the astral plane, and found ourselves chained to darkness. I could see you when you spoke to my petrified form in the underworld, and again in Fabul, but I couldn't understand a word you said. All I could feel was unrelenting fear that infused with every fiber of my being, multiplied for each of my sisters in chains as well. That was what I felt too,
Rydia replied.
I heard your cries, but it was like they were in a foreign language. I could feel your fear and despair, it's the same as the other Eidolons I've rescued. Is that why they cannot recognize me? Their souls are chained in a well of darkness, Rydia,
the sylph frowned.
There is no light when they look toward the heavens. You must be their light if you are to save them, and your friends.
Before Rydia could ask them any more, the two sylphs disappeared in a flicker of glittering green sparks, fading into the ether. Rydia sat back on her heels, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to digest what had just happened. Edge gave Yang a slap on the back, which nearly knocked the weakened monk to the floor.
You've got fans in high places, don't you, Yang?
Yang chuckled to himself, grasping onto Edge's arm to pull himself up.
It's been only by the blessing of my friends that I am where I stand now. For that, I thank all of you. Me too, of course,
Ursula flushed.
I'm eternally grateful for everything you've done for my family.
Rydia stood up, resting her hands on her hips.
So this malaise has even reached the Eidolon King himself. I suppose it was inevitable, I saw him turn to stone right before my eyes, after all.
She sighed, biting down on her lip.
The defiance I displayed in our last moments together, will he really respond to anything I say if I can find him again? Rydia.
Luca frowned. Edge gave her hair a tug, and she spun around to face him, glaring.
Come on, Rydia. Your bonds with the Eidolons aren't gonna lose to something like this, are they?
Rydia softened her glare, reaching up to force away the tears that were threatening to spring.
You're right. I will bring them all back.
Yang cleared his throat.
So is it my understanding that you are headed to Varen as well? Yes,
Rydia nodded.
We spoke to Sheila before coming here, we know what happened in Fabul. We too, have business with Cecil. Unfortunately, Varen Castle is protected by the same glow we saw covering the Tower of Babel,
Edge sighed.
All of the crystals are in Varen's hands now. They are probably what are generating the shield.
Yang raised his eyebrows in surprise, and Rydia smacked her fist into her palm.
Regardless, we will find a way. If we can combine the Eidolon's powers with ours, anything is possible. We'll find Titan in Agart, and bring him back to us. Odin, Ashura, Leviathan, Bahamut, and my mother's dragon, we'll track them down, too. Let's get moving, then.
Yang nodded, taking a limping step forward.
You can catch me up on everything that has transpired on the way to Agart, and I will help prepare for our battle with Titan. Father.
Ursula protested, shakily climbing out of the bed. Luca swooped in to help her, bending down so that Ursula could use her shoulders as a crutch.
You're in deplorable condition. How do you expect to be of any help?
Whoa. Rydia felt her lips tug into the tiniest of smiles. Ursula really is her father's daughter. And she's matured so much since I last saw her. Edge nodded.
I'm afraid Ursula is right, Yang. You're not going to fight with us.
Yang's face fell, his mustache drooping like a battered umbrella.
What? You need to recover first. You've got a wife and daughter relying on you.
Edge nodded to Ursula, who lifted her chin and hoisted herself taller with Luca's help.
Remember that. Yes. You are right about that,
Yang sighed, gazing at Ursula.
There are no words to express my regret. Just when my kingdom needs me the most. It will be okay,
Ursula offered.
I will rest as long as it takes so that I might join you and fight alongside everyone. And if there is any other way I can be of assistance, just let me know.
Yang beamed, giving her a subtle nod.
Let's get you to the Falcon so we can make our preparations to depart.
Luca smiled.
Rydia, maybe you should go grab our friend and let him know we're ready to leave. Oh dear, I forgot all about him.
Rydia frowned.
He must have done very well at being a distraction. What do you mean?
Ursula blinked, and Edge shook his head.
We'll explain everything on the way to the Falcon. It's a really long story. I'm sure you have some tales of your own for us as well.
Golbez stared down at the pair of graves wordlessly, clutching his arms to fight off the chill of the stalled desert air that drifted lifelessly over the oasis banks. He had read the names on the markers over and over to the point where they had lost all meaning, just a jumble of letters that were collected together and etched over a sprawling epitaph. His fears of returning to the Blue Planet had been confirmed many times over in the small space of the past few days, but he was only now realizing that he had foolishly only been focused on potential conflict and confrontations with the living, Cecil, Edge, Rydia, Rosa, for starters, and new faces that would be bound to hate him by instinct, like his nephew. He hadn't had the good sense to fear the non-sentient confrontations he would encounter as well. Returning to the scenes of past transgressions, like Damsion, had shaken him to his core. He could barely comprehend how he had managed to function for the agonizing short time they were there. Thank goodness for small distractions, like him becoming target fodder for Harley's goons. But he hadn't realized that the Oasis Gardens had become a makeshift graveyard when he had made the off-the-cuff suggestion to search for his imaginary lost article to get that woman out of her own house. When his eyes had first fallen over Tella and Anna's graves, it had taken every ounce of his self-control not to keel over in shock. But he must have flinched, or shuddered noticeably, when the woman asked him what was wrong. He quickly lied and said he had gotten pricked by an errant orchid cactus. When they had scoured every inch of the gardens, and the roof still had not exploded off the top of her house, Golbez figured it was time to let go of the ruse. He thanked her for coming out, and she left to find her husband. He had been so enraptured by the presence of the unexpected graves that he had not noticed the cries of the sylphs had ceased to fill the air. Tella. There were many men that were lost to the throes of my rage during that damnable war. But it's always your face that haunts my darkest nightmares. The look in yours and Cecil's eyes that night in the Tower of Zot will undoubtedly be the last thing I see before I follow you to the beyond. Piercing blue hatred, the crystals themselves manifest.
Anna. Tella.
Golbez stiffened as Rydia's voice whispered behind him. His eyes remained trained on the graves as Rydia joined his side, her hands folded in prayer. He lowered his head so that his hair would fall over his eyes, shutting her out.
Once again, the world is facing a chaotic maelstrom of war and violence. Now, more than ever, I hope we may receive your loving protection. And I hope you are there for Edward, too, wherever he may be.
She bowed her head, a tear sliding down her cheek. A flicker of pale light danced over the oasis, despite the sun having disappeared behind the moon. Golbez swore that he could see the reflection of two pearlescent figures staring up at him from the water, an elderly man with untamable white hair and sloping glasses and a young girl in a goldenrod gown, her eyes shining with love. The old man nodded at him, and a ripple erupted in the center of the oasis, dashing their forms into stardust. Golbez clenched his fist so hard that his fingernails cut into his palm, his throat tightening. I'm sorry. Because of me, you and your daughter were forced to leave this planet far too soon.
I'm sorry,
Rydia suddenly said. He jumped at the unexpected synchronicity of his thoughts and her words, and caught a flash of his father's eyes reflected back in her gaze. No. Not Cluya's. Mine. He still had not gotten used to seeing royal violet in the mirror instead of the malevolent amber that had stained his irises under that infernal, darkened shroud.
What is there to be sorry for?
Golbez asked quietly, and she shook her head.
I grow weary of my own tears. I can't imagine what anyone else must think of them. You've been very kind to help us as long as you have.
Don't ask me any questions, Golbez mentally pleaded. Not now. Not when we're so close to finding Cecil. Let me use you for just a little while longer, at least until I can see him again and truly come to know his fate in all this. After that, you can do with me what you will. Rydia shook her head, like she was talking herself out of something, and finally sighed.
You're coming with us to Agart, right? The travelers in the house, they were old friends of ours. They're joining us, but they're far too weak to fight. I need all the help I can get with Titan. It seemed fairly easy for you to subdue him the last time.
Oh, Golbez blinked. So you still have use of me as well, that's a fair exchange.
Yes, of course I'm coming. If our business here is done, let us proceed.
Rydia turned and started to walk away, Golbez following close behind. As they drifted through the ghostly, silent streets, Rydia bowed her head, her voice barely audible even in the stillness.
I don't think I ever asked, why did you come to my rescue in Agart?
He absent-mindedly fingered the prayer beads hanging from his wrist, trying to distract himself in an effort to control the tone of his voice.
It was something that needed to be done.
A simple, truthful answer. Rydia nodded, pressing her fingers to her lips. They walked the rest of the way back to the Falcon in complacent silence. They're coming. I can feel it. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the frosty, salt-saturated air, holding it inside of her until she felt as if a fuse had been lit in her lungs, on the brink of explosion. She let her breath rush out, marveling that it was the only sound she could hear in what had been up until a short time ago, a village bursting with anxious energy. The cowardly townspeople had all fled for the mountains like rats, abandoning a sinking ship when she had swept through to collect Titan. Ever since she had ensnared the Eidolons in her trap, starting with the Allfather himself, she had been able to tap into their plane, interrupting or listening in to the flow of their ceaseless psychic impulses at her will. When she had at last made the final capture in the depths of the Feymarch, the damnable chatter that now always echoed in the back of her mind had ceased, and she reveled in the total control she had not over just the Eidolons themselves, but their entire channel of existence. But slowly now, the voices had started up once again. At first, it was just one lone old man's lamenting, and she briefly contemplated the incomprehensible notion that she had made a mistake, and left one of the Eidolons freed that had managed to somehow elude her all this time. But as the hours wore on, more and more voices joined the life stream, and when she could bring herself to listen in, she realized something even more terrifying than the notion that there had been a flaw in her carefully orchestrated execution. I didn't account for the possibility that the people of the Blue Planet could possibly evolve beyond their current state of existence. Not after all this time of incessant idleness. No. He didn't account for it. And now that weakling summoner intends to take them back. But it's all for naught, the crystals have been gathered, and will soon be transported back to their rightful place with the interdimensional elevator. Regardless of her efforts, she will be too late. She was too late 16 years prior. She lifted her head, smirking to herself. The atmosphere had shifted, a spark of defiance was alit in the air, stinging the exposed skin of her bare feet and jutting shoulders. It made the hair on the back of her neck stick up in the most delightful way. She wondered if this was the impulse these insects called fear. You should be grateful I've come all this way to meet with you one last time. I'll gift you with the depthless despair you so rightfully deserve for trying to get in our way. Although I doubt your infinitesimal minds will be able to comprehend its fullest extent. She turned, her amber eyes glistening like headlamps as they locked onto the fierce emerald orbs that had manifested before her. Rydia clenched her jaw as she met the mysterious girl's gaze. Even though she hadn't said a word, Rydia had the distinct impression that she was silently being mocked inside this lunatic's head. She was wearing the same amused expression Rydia had burned into her brain before her senses had left her after being struck by the girl's frightful lightning back in the underworld. They had found Agard abandoned upon their arrival, and no sign of Titan, or any of his handiwork, no upended mountains, ruptured landscapes, or shattered streets. In the far distance, on the northern end of town that was marked by cascading cliffs that eventually would drop you into the ocean, Rydia had spotted a lone figure, her slender frame wrapped in a gossamer shroud that gave her the illusion of having billowing angel wings. Right away, she recognized the woman who had laid her flat in the sealed cave. Well, now she's going to regret leaving me alive.
Where's Titan?
Rydia hissed between grinding teeth.
And the rest of my friends, while you're at it.
The mysterious girl shook her head, giggling. Straight to the point, eh?
I should inform you that I'm done with this planet. You and the Eidolons serve no purpose for me any longer. Maybe so, but we're not done with you,
Edge snapped, grabbing her by the front of her dress and in a blinding flash, pressing a knife to her throat. Rydia took a step back, Luca and the man in black flanking her from behind. With a delicate flick of his fingers, a line of red materialized in the curve of her porcelain neck, and her lips curled into an indecipherable smile.
You're the insect that saw it fit to run away from me rather than stay and fight in the Tower of Babel, right?
Edge reddened, pressing the knife deeper and sending another gush of blood over the mithril blade.
You should know best that even an insect does what is needed to survive. If you say so,
she shrugged.
Perhaps I'll try your little stunt for myself. Out of my face.
She blasted him with white orb of energy, sending him reeling backwards as she clasped her throat and did a one-handed backflip over the cliff behind her.
What they?
Rydia cried, her eyes widening as she froze in place. Edge climbed to his knees, cursing under his breath as he clutched the tattered remains of cloth over his chest, which had taken the brunt of her attack. Suddenly, the ground below them gave a violent shudder, sending the four of them to their knees as a massive, dirt-lined hand clawed its way over the cliffs, plunging its fingernails into the earth and tearing it asunder.
Titan!
Rydia shrieked. Another hand joined the first over the ledge of the cliff, and Titan hauled himself up, his greasy, matted, violet hair hanging in his face in sea-sprayed chunks. Sitting on his shoulder was the mysterious girl, a smirk on her lips as she leaned forward, cupping her chin in her hands. Titan took a few hesitant, lumbering steps forward, like he was a drunk stumbling home after a long night at the pub. Rydia rushed forward to meet him, cupping her hands around her mouth.
It's me. Rydia.
Titan stared at her blankly, and the mysterious girl let out a burst of laughter, nearly falling off his shoulder. Rydia tore the hyacinth from her tangled locks, ignoring the sting of the hair being ripped out of her scalp as she desperately lifted the ornament into the air.
Please, you've got to wake up.
Rydia cried. Right on cue, both Edge and Golbez summoned Blitz and Thunder magic, igniting the sky with piercing light to fuel the hyacinth. As the ruby's light danced over Titan's form, the mysterious girl let out a hiss, raising her hand. A black veil of rolling smog erupted from Titan's eyes, sending the Eidolon into fits as he ground at his face and stomped his feet into the ground, fracturing it beneath the party and splitting the road into gaping chasms. The hairpin was knocked out of Rydia's hands, bouncing along the buckling ground until it stopped at Titan's feet.
It's no use now,
the mysterious girl sang.
So that's how you've been undoing my curse. Very interesting, I have to admit. She blinded him with magic.
Luca shrieked.
What kind of monster are you?
The mysterious girl glanced at Luca, licking her lips.
What I am is beyond your comprehension. Titan.
Rydia cried, crawling away from the pit she had half fallen into toward the thrashing Gigas and the glimmering hyacinth.
We'll save you, just hang on.
I need something that heals blindness. Fast. She desperately glanced back at the sprawl of the village behind her. Maybe if one of us can break into a general store.
Rydia, look out!
Edge screamed. She lifted her head just in time to see Titan's meaty fist swinging for her head. The man in black dove forward, tackling Rydia and rolling her away just as the fist slammed into the ground, sending the land into another heaving fit and shattering the hairpin into an explosion of dust. As Rydia clung to the man in black, her gaze caught a fragment of ruby flying into the air and being swallowed by a chasm, a scream ripping from her throat.
No.
Behind them, Luca and Edge were struggling to claw their way out of a pit, their legs kicking frantically as they were crushed against the raging plates shifting beneath them. The mysterious girl threw her head back and laughed, the gash of red from Edge's earlier threat now seeping down, ignored, into the valley between her breasts.
Ha ha ha. You said you wanted Titan. So here he is, in all of his glory. You've been together since you were a child, right? So I think it's very fitting that he's the one that ends your little journey. Really, I couldn't have planned it better even if I had tried. Titan. Please.
Rydia wailed, arching her back as she tried to escape the man in black's grasp. He held her steadfastly, knowing that she would be running to her doom if he let her go. He could hear the ground humming ominously, and knew that another earthquake was moments away from striking. He closed his eyes, bracing himself against Rydia and shielding the back of her head with his hands as she screamed into his chest.
Float.
Rydia's body slackened as she felt a warmth blossom between her shoulder blades and the weight of her savior lifting from her body. She opened her eyes only to see the man in black falling away from her, his eyes wide with surprise as a pair of translucent angel wings sprouted on his back. Rydia glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she was blinded by heavenly light and lifted off the ground as well. Edge and Luca were rescued from the pit that had nearly swallowed them, staring at each other in wonder as they were lifted to safety, their feet inches off of the trembling ground.
Wah!
Rydia blinked, whirling around. The mysterious girl's jaw had dropped, and Titan was still clawing at his eyes, his frustrated howls filling the air. Porum was standing at the perimeter of the cliffside, using her mithril staff as a crutch as she struggled to keep herself from tumbling forward. Her eyes were wild and flashing with rage, her hair still half spilled over her heaving shoulders. As she turned to look at Rydia, her eyes rolled into the back of her head and she promptly collapsed, her staff clattering to the ground.
Porum!
Rydia cried, willing her newly granted wings to drive her forward as she floated toward her. Luca beat her to the punch, skidding down next to Porum and pulling her into her arms.
You can't do this. You're still too weak.
Luca lectured, although the tears in her eyes were preventing her from sounding too awfully angry. Porum let out a groan in protest, her head falling back against Luca's chest.
Sorry, Porum,
Rydia whispered.
But thank you. Here he comes.
Edge called, and Rydia whirled back around to face Titan, her heart pounding in her ears. He was thrashing toward them frantically, the mysterious girl back to her usual composed self as she pointed toward them and let out another peal of laughter. What am I supposed to do now? Rydia gulped. She eyed the decimated remains of her hairpin scattered in the grass, and her stomach lurched painfully. Golbez hesitantly reached for his blade, the sound of the metal dragging over his scabbard sending a shiver down his spine. If she can't find a way to awaken Titan quickly, we'll have to kill him before he destroys this entire village. Baron.
What is that monster?
Edward lifted his head from the floor, not bothering with sweeping away the sweaty clumps of hair that had fallen in his face. He could see well enough that certain doom lay before them, no need to sharpen the picture any further.
Not a monster. An Eidolon.
Rosa winced as Cecil pulled himself off of her and reached down, yanking her up by the hand and pressing his lips to her ear.
That's correct. And I'm afraid any traitors will find themselves at the other end of Zantetsuken, his legendary blade. Odin can only be struck down by lightning. And I don't see any black mages here. Do you?
Cecil let out a strained laugh, and Rosa pulled away from him, biting her lip. She cautiously lifted her palm behind her, her fingers brushing the invisible barrier to test its strength. The barrier flashed a warning yellow as shockwaves shot up her digits, and she shrieked, yanking her hand away. Trapped? How? How can Cecil possibly summon an Eidolon?
Kain.
Theodore stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Kain glanced down at him in surprise, helping him to his feet. Theodore grasped Kain's arm for balance as he regained his senses, his other hand running over his throat, where deep red marks had been imprinted from his scarf.
I could feel it, a powerful light raising me from the depths. You didn't tell me you could use white magic. I didn't know I could.
Kain stared at his dragon scale gauntlets, like he expected the answer to be written on them.
That was magic? Another gift from the light of Mount Ordeals. A little help here, guys.
Sid grunted, a clang of steel ringing out as Odin's sword came down upon his hammer. He forced the blade away and made his counterattack, striking Odin's horse in the neck. The horse snorted and staggered back, ghastly silver blood trailing down the twitching muscles underneath its coat. Sid took another wild swing, driving the horse back further. Soon he had Odin pinned against the back wall. Edward joined Kain and Theodore, having finally peeled himself off of the floor.
How are we supposed to beat an Eidolon? If Rydia were here. I suspect if Rydia were here, it would not matter.
Kain frowned.
Odin appears to bend to Cecil's will now.
Theodore shook his head, sheathing his blade.
No. It's not my father Odin is obeying. Look.
He pointed to the mysterious girl, who was now seated on Cecil's throne, idly watching the chaos unfold before her. Her cheek was pressed to her hand, and her entire body was alit in a pale, almost ethereal glow.
Cecil is not a summoner, and neither is she. This girl, whoever she may be, is nothing but an impostor. Surely you too have been in the presence of Rydia when she has summoned an Eidolon, yes? There is palpable tension that fills the air when she calls upon the powers of those Elderworld gods. It's both terrible and extraordinary to behold. You can feel the magic soak into your very marrow, and for just a moment, you're elevated to her plane of existence, before being discharged back to reality. He pressed his lips together. I don't feel any of that now. That creature is just a chained act in a circus. He's in pain. I can feel it.
He rested his splayed fingers against his chest.
Even if we combine our strength, we will never beat him. Our only chance we have is to wake him up.
He's right, Kain thought. It's been 17 years, but everything he said is exactly how I remember feeling when I witnessed the calling of an Eidolon for the first time. When Rydia summoned Titan to eject Cecil and I from Mist, and the two of them tore down an entire mountain. I had never been so sure I was going to die, yet I didn't want to close my eyes through any of it.
Sid!
Edward cried, cupping his hands around his mouth.
Retreat!
Sid didn't have to ask if Edward was sure. He spun on his heel and made his escape before Odin could recover from the barrage of blows he had rained upon his steed. The horse was anxiously kicking in the air and thrashing its head, droplets of blood staining the heavy velvet curtains that blanketed the windows and kept them entrenched in darkness.
Giving up already?
Cecil tilted his head.
I expected more from you at this point, Edward. Are you really a king?
Theodore could see Edward wince as Cecil's taunt hit its mark.
Call Odin back.
Rosa demanded, shaking Cecil's arm, and the mysterious girl stifled a laugh as Cecil ignored Rosa's plea, his eyes glued to the Eidolon and eagerly anticipating his next strike.
Do you have a plan, Theodore?
Cain asked, and Theodore nodded, clenching his fists as Sid scurried up to them.
We will use hallowed light to open Odin's eyes. Sid, Edward, I need you to be my cover. Cain, I need to borrow your strength, the light you received from Mount Ordeals, it should be the same as my own. If we can call upon it together, it might be enough. Aren't you forgetting the part where using your body as a conduit for that much power nearly kills you?
Cain asked dryly, and Theodore offered a small smile.
You know white magic now, right? I'll make the most of that. Wait.
Cain gasped, and Edward chuckled, despite the hopelessness of the situation laid before them.
He really is Rosa's son, isn't he? Stubborn as all get out.
Sid shrugged.
Well, I don't hear anything better coming from you, Cain, so we're going with Theodore's idea.
Cain pressed his hand to his forehead, exhaling deeply. Truly, so much has changed in my time away. Yet even more has remained the same. A small part of me has to wonder how they managed to survive this long without a voice of reason occasionally prodding them.
Let's go, Cain.
Theodore called, folding his hands and closing his eyes. Cain pushed the base of his lance against the floor, wrapping his fingers around the handle and sliding his eyes shut. He could feel the throne room quaking once more as Odin rode closer, and the jarring ring of another collision of steel.
Sid!
Rosa cried out, her voice now miles away. Theodore felt the first pulse of devastating energy reverberate through his core, allowing himself to submit to the blinding darkness that would close his senses off from the life-threatening Eidolon racing toward him. He would not allow for distractions. He could feel himself sinking into a dimension of obsidian deep within his heart, pinpricks of light that served as his windows to reality shrinking to specks of dust as he plummeted down, down, down. Odin! Wake up! I beg of you. This is not justice. I know, thanks to my parents, that the Eidolons are beings of light, pure of heart, greater than any man, guardians of order. I know of the role you played in saving our planet 17 years ago, of the unwavering trust you instilled in the only human in which you've entered into a true covenant, Rydia of Mist. Another powerful shockwave rocked Theodore, his eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness as minuscule vibrations danced beneath his skin, sparks of starlight coursing through his limbs. He plunged yet deeper, following a gentle voice calling his name in rhythm with the erratic beat of his heart. Theodore! 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 Father? His lungs began to burn with effort when he realized he could no longer will himself to draw breath. The emptiness around him had transformed into a blackened pool, columns of pearl-like orbs gurgling past as he struggled to twist himself around to swim back to the surface. He extended his hand as far as he could stretch, giving a final kick of his legs to propel himself upward as an exhalation of bubbles burst from his white lips, the last of his life-sustaining oxygen dissipating before his eyes. From the darkness above, a hand encased in emerald dragon scales seized the prince's, a surge of crystal-tinged light inundating Theodore's failing sight as something within his chest burst. As the heir to the Holy Paladin, I command you to heed my prayer, awaken. Rydia saw the man in black lifting his blade, and she stumbled toward him, shaking her head hysterically.
No. We can't. Rydia!
Edge cried, grabbing her by the hand and yanking her backward.
We must go on the offense. It's over. If Titan makes it past us, he's going to kill Porom and Luca and then destroy the rest of Agart.
Rydia snatched her hand away, clenching her jaw.
It can't be over yet. There has to still be a way to save him.
She looked back to the shattered ruby, her mind spinning. There was no way what remained would hold any kind of light, it had been obliterated into hundreds of sand-like particles.
Rubies are supposed to symbolize deep love and courage. It's also used to banish nightmares.
Deep love and courage. That's what the man in black told me back in Mysidia. Rydia chewed on her lip, the pounding of heart now a roar that was drowning out even Titan's screams. I don't need a piece of jewelry to prove my love, and I get my courage from having friends I want to protect. She looked up at Edge, smiling slightly as he stared back at her confusedly. The sylphs said I need to be the Eidolon's light. But how can I banish the nightmare that plagues them still?
I have an idea,
Rydia breathed, dashing toward Titan and the crushed Hyacinth.
I need you both to cover me. Rydia.
Edge sighed, running after her. The man in black followed, and Luca clung to Porum tighter, shaking her head. If any of them made it out of this alive, she would personally bend over and kiss Rydia's boots. Rydia, unbeknownst to the bizarre oaths that were taking place behind her, had quickly bent down, scooping what was left of the hairpin into hand and clenching her fingers tightly around it. Before Titan could make a swipe at her, she rolled out of the way, summoning Ifrit under her breath. A mandala of flames danced beneath her, and the fire djinn appeared as Edge and the man in black fought off Titan's attempts to crush the newcomer. Ifrit glared back at Titan in confusion, smoke curling out of his nostrils.
Ifrit.
Rydia scrambled to her feet, extending her empty hand.
I need you to give me a boost so I can reach Titan.
In the background, she could hear the clang of Titan's fists meeting the man in black's ebony sword, and felt a trail of sweat run down her neck.
And we need to hurry.
He silently obliged, crawling down onto all fours so that Rydia could climb onto his shoulders. Once she had locked her knees around his chest, he stood up, his towering height combined with Rydia's diminutive form just enough to put her at eye level with the Gigas. The mysterious girl stared at Rydia wondrously, but didn't say a word. She didn't want to be the one to crush the little brat, it would be so much better if she were to die by the hands of one of her former servants instead.
Titan.
Rydia gasped, clutching her legs tighter as she swerved a bit to maintain her balance.
Please. Forgive me for this.
She lunged forward, tossing the ruby dust into his clouded glare. Titan stumbled backward as he screamed in pain, his fists flying up to his eyes once again as he inadvertently ground the gem shards deeper into his sockets. Rydia took a deep breath and launched herself off of Ifrit's shoulders, grasping onto Titan's neck and clinging on for dear life. Ifrit disappeared in a plume of smoke that made everyone on the ground choke and furiously gasp for air.
What did you do?
The mysterious girl shrieked, pressing her hand forward to cast a spell. Before she could complete the incantation, she was thrown backwards from Titan's shoulders by a storm of shuriken stars, followed by the deafening clang of a frying pan smacking her in the forehead. Even the man in black couldn't help but let out a silent cheer as Edge readied the ladle as well, just in case. The mysterious girl screamed as she tumbled over the cliffs behind them, opening a teleport portal out of sight before she plunged into the sea. Rydia pushed her forward to Titan's, blinking away her tears as she stared into his bloodied, watery eyes.
Titan. Please, wake up. I still need you. I'll always need you. Mommy wouldn't want you to be sad and lost like this. Please, come back to me. Together, we can still save both our worlds.
Titan blinked up at Rydia, his hands gently reaching around her trembling body to provide support for her back. As his restored vision began to focus once more, he stared at her intensely, and she could feel the vibrations of his low baritone bubbling up from his throat.
Adeline.
Rydia tilted her head.
Hey? No. That's Mommy. I'm Rydia.
Rydia's mom's name is Adeline? Edge tugged down his cowl, staring up at her. Even though he had helped commission the grave that was used in her mother's final resting place, he had never actually learned the woman's name. His source within the village had been rather nervous providing what little information he had, and had confided to Edge that no one knew Rydia's mother by her name anyway. She had always been referred to as the motherly summoner, and that was what he had ultimately chosen to inscribe in the tribute to her legacy.
Rydia. Ridai.
Titan gasped, and Rydia nodded, a small smile breaking out on her face. Titan shook his head, lowering his gaze.
For a moment. I thought your mother had come back from the dead. You've grown so much, Rydia. You are truly her image in every way imaginable. A beautiful woman, Adeline was. I've always dreamed of the day I could see her again. Titan.
Rydia buried her head in his neck, letting out a low moan.
Me too. I miss her so much. There isn't a day I don't wish her to be by my side. But it was you that watched over me after she was gone. That's why I had to save you, because you saved me all those years ago when mist burned, and helped me find my way in the Feymarch after Leviathan spirited me away. Thank you, Rydia.
Titan nodded, gingerly stroking her hair.
But I really did hear your mother's voice, just as I was waking up. She had a message for you, she wants you to return to Mist, right away. Hey.
Rydia pulled away, shaking her head.
There must be some mistake. I thought I was to only return to Mist once I had restored all of the Eidolons. There are so many still missing. Including the king and queen. Her words were unmistakable,
Titan said in a grave tone.
It may not have any relation to your mother's message, but I cannot feel the presence of the king and queen in our world anymore. They are far beyond anyone's reach, even a human as powerful as yourself. That's impossible,
Rydia sniffled.
My friend's ship was recently capsized. I have delivered Adeline's message,
Titan replied gently, setting Rydia down and bowing his head.
What you do with it is entirely up to you, dear. I will follow you to the ends of the earth, and the depths of space, if it comes down to it.
In a flash of light, he disappeared, leaving in his wake the shattered cliffside and the hanging shadow of the moon in the horizon. Rydia absent-mindedly reached up to touch the hyacinth, only remembering when her fingers tangled with her knotted hair that it was hers no longer. Mommy? Did I do something wrong? Why am I being called back so suddenly?
Ugh.
Porum shuddered and let out a series of dry, hacking coughs. Rydia's daydream shattered, she ran back to Porum and Luca, who was forcing Porum to sit up and giving her back a gentle smack to relieve her choking gasps.
Porum!
Rydia cried, and Luca shook her head.
This girl needs a lot of fluids and some serious medicating. Can you all help me get her back to the Falcon?
Of course, Edge nodded, bending down lifting Porum's limp body into his arms. Rydia tried to keep up with his hurried strides as they made their way back through town, reaching to take Porum's wrapped hand.
We couldn't have done it without you, Porum. A minute longer and we would have been swallowed whole by the earth.
Rydia said breathlessly, and felt just the tiniest twinge of movement as Porum's fingers brushed over the back of her hand. Edge flicked his gaze over the two of them, clicking his tongue against the roof of his mouth.
What a reckless girl.
Rydia wondered just who exactly he was talking about, but didn't bother to ask. Baron. Theodore's eyes snapped open as a deafening roar erupted from outside the castle. It sounded as if someone were tossing boulders on the castle's roof and turning the surrounding farmland inside out. He was face down on the floor, the gravelly imprint of stone in his cheek an indication that he had been laying there for quite some time. Next to him, Kane was passed out in a spill of corn silk, his hand clasped protectively over Theodore's. Theodore felt Kane's fingers twitch in response to Theodore's movement, just barely, and then came the familiar stinging behind his eyes. How many times in the past few days had he cried, even though he had sworn on Biggs's grave that he would never give in to such weakness again? The light. It wasn't just a dream. But how long have we been asleep? Sid and Edward were also knocked out, both collapsed in front of the barrier that Cecil had erected, or at least, where it had been before being blown away by the light. Rosa was slumped against Cecil's legs, her head bowed into her chest. Cecil was silently standing before them, his eyes wide and his body entirely still. His pupils had shrunk to pinholes, his lips pale periwinkle. Ragnarok was still held in his grip, but was frozen stiff, not even moving when he drew breath. Behind him, the mysterious girl was deflated in Cecil's throne, the glow around her body vanished. She was clutching the throne's gilded arms, her knuckles bloodied and raw as she huffed for breath between clenched teeth. And flanking Cecil's opposite side, his blade shoved into the cracked floor only inches from Theodore and Kane's hands, was Odin. He had dismounted his horse, which was nowhere in sight. Theodore wondered if it had been frightened away by the light. He felt the beginnings of a scream clench his throat as Odin kneeled before them, his armor screeching as he extended a hand toward Kane's face, his thumb resting on the dragoon's jaw.
How long it has been, Kane?
Odin asked, his voice booming within his helmet. To Theodore's shock, Kane opened his eyes, lifting them dizzily to meet Odin's crimson orbs.
Why, your highness?
Kane stammered.
How?
Cecil had once told me that His Majesty had taken on the form of an Eidolon in death. Could that have been Odin?
That's the voice of the late king, rest his soul.
Sid had hauled himself to his feet, his voice quivering as he pointed dumbly toward Odin. Next to him, Edward was stirring, his hand clenching the shoulder that Kane had stabbed during their encounter in Damsion's throne room. The wound had reopened, sending a fresh spill of blood over his garments. Odin released Kane's face, standing back up and shaking his head slowly.
And look at what lies before me. Rosa, Theodore, all my children of Baron. How could I possibly turn my sword against any of you?
Theodore bit his lip as he forced himself to stand with Odin, his spent body not happy about being forced to cooperate. This man knows my name. He was the king before my father. The one that Golbez murdered and replaced with a fake. He's an Eidolon now?
Your Highness.
Kane propped himself up with his arms, grimacing with the effort. Odin glided over to Cecil, who was still immobilized, clamping one massive hand on Cecil's shoulder. It engulfed the entirety of the slender man's build. He turned back to Kane, sadness permeating his voice.
You must save Cecil. And your homeland. That is my final request of you. Kane Highwind, commander of the Dragoons.
Odin disappeared, the chamber erupting in a flare of firelight. Each of the standing candelabras and the blown glass chandeliers above had been replenished with flame, flooding the room with brilliance. Rosa groaned, lifting her head as she pushed her hand through her hair and gazed dizzily at Cecil's still form.
What's happening?
Luca left Porum in Harley and Azaoi's capable hands as Edge raced them back to Mist, not bothering to ask Rydia if that was indeed what she had wanted to do. Rydia slumped into a free bed in the stateroom, wondering if the spinning in her head was from the exhausting battle they had just waged, or if was because reality had already stolen away the very brief joy she had elicited from saving Titan from the mysterious girl's wrath, sending her heart on another tailspin. She had been mostly ignoring the activity around her, until she felt a shadow drift over her. When she looked up, she saw Leonora, the Epopt from Troya, gazing down at her worriedly.
Are you okay?
Leonora asked in her breathy voice, and Rydia nodded.
Yes. Or at least, I will be. It's just been a hard couple of days. But I suppose you know all about that. I suppose I do,
Leonora nodded, tilting her head toward the bed.
May I? Oh, of course,
Rydia flushed, suddenly feeling very rude for making an injured girl feel like she had to stand. Leonora plopped down next to Rydia, reaching up to adjust her mitre as it flopped over her forehead. Rydia suddenly remembered the amethyst hairpin she had found at the mouth of the lodestone cavern, and reached into her pouch, fishing it out and holding it before Leonora.
Would this help with keeping your mitre on? Seems like a lot of hat for a little lady.
Leonora's eyes widened as she took the hairpin from Rydia's fingers, turning it over a few times.
Actually, this is mine. I had to leave it behind when Pollum and I escaped with the crystal. I can't believe you found it. Well, that's pretty lucky.
Rydia grinned, taking the hairpin back and reaching up to fasten it into Leonora's hair, making sure the mitre was set flush along with it. She sat back when she was finished, looking Leonora up and down and nodding.
There. Perfect again. Thank you.
Leonora smiled, pressing her palms to her cheeks.
I know it seems silly to fret over a trinket at a time like this, but I was really sad about having to leave it behind. It was a gift from my family when I was first being seriously considered for the Epopt position. It reminds me a lot of home. And why it's so important that I be here right now. No. I understand.
Rydia shook her head. Too well.
Do you know what an amethyst symbolizes?
Leonora shook her head, and Rydia nodded toward the stairway that led to the upper deck.
When you feel up to it, you should ask the man in the black cape if he knows. He told me something about one of my relics that was really interesting. I will do so.
Leonora smiled, but leaned in, cupping her hand over her mouth.
But he does scare me, quite a lot. He nearly gave me a heart attack when I laid eyes on him in the lodestone cavern. He kind of looks like a devil you would wake up next to when you've gone to hell.
Rydia tried not to laugh, which felt much nicer than her one-woman broodfest, and she decided right away that she very much liked Leonora. She may have been Palem's student, and potentially a rival of Lucas for the brat's affections, but she held none of his pretentious views or attitudes.
Well, I'll admit he is pretty intense. But he's been nothing but kind to me since we met. It's kind of weird to say out loud, but I feel really drawn to him, despite some of his more frightening aspects. Like you could be in love with him.
Leonora blinked, and Rydia practically fell off the bed.
No, no, no. Definitely nothing like that.
Rydia shook her head for emphasis.
Geez. I mean, more like, there's an unspoken connection. Like I know him from somewhere. Somehow, my heart remembers, but my mind does not. Ah,
Leonora nodded.
like you're bound by fate. Exactly,
Rydia nodded.
I don't know if it's for the better or the worst. But it is what it is.
Leonora pressed her hands together, biting her lip.
You seem a little happier now. I'm glad for it. Harley caught me up on everything while you were in Agart. I realize you have been through a lot. But I just wanted to let you know that we, Palom and I, and I'm sure Porum and the others too, appreciate everything you are doing. Although I pray this does not go on for much longer, I will be by your side as soon as my strength allows it.
She shook her head.
It should have been me that assisted you with support magic in Agart. My fever was only just breaking when Porum suddenly shot out of here with no explanation.
She gazed over at Porum, who was now back in bed and dead to the world.
If anything had happened to her, Palom would never forgive himself. He loves her dearly, you know? Even if he doesn't act like it. I know,
Rydia said softly, staring down at her boots.
But, to me, that is no way to love someone. Ultimately, something has to give. If you were to lose someone you loved without them realizing it, wouldn't that just be the worst feeling in the world? I think so, yes.
Leonora pressed her lips together, not daring to look Rydia in the eyes. She had a feeling Rydia was trying to convince herself of something rather than just make idle conversation.
Especially in times like these.
The man in black suddenly appeared in the doorway, causing both women to jump a mile in the air when his voice boomed out.
Rydia, we've landed at Mist. Whoever is coming with, get upstairs now.
Luca looked up from where she had been talking to Tsukinawa and tending to Porum. She had also been trying to casually eavesdrop on Rydia and Leonora's conversation, but that had not gone well at all. Tsukinawa talked a mile a minute and was loud as hell about it.
Fine. Bossy.
But the man in black had already disappeared from sight, missing her mild insult. Rydia stood up, resting her hand on Leonora's shoulder.
Thank you for taking the time to talk. I really hope that when all of this is over, we can get to know each other better. I hope for that as well,
Leonora smiled.
There is so much I would love to learn about the Eidolons, if you're ever up to it, that is. Sure.
Rydia smiled back, giving a teasing wink.
Don't let Palom hear you talking like that, he'll think he has some competition with becoming a sage.
She turned to leave with Luca, giving Leonora a wave before clomping up the stairs. Leonora sat back on the bed confusedly, her eyes finding Palom's sleeping form as she pressed her fingers to her mouth. She thought back to her training in the Tower of Trials, and how distressed Palom had seemed when he had mistakenly accused her of wanting to become a sage. She still couldn't get the way his fingers felt digging into her shoulders out of her mind, like his fingerprints had branded her flesh through her clothes. Palom wants to be a sage? Rydia, Edge, Luca, and the man in black approached the entrance to Mist once more, heavy curtains of gossamer white drifting over them as they left the meadow path and crossed into the village proper. Luca snapped her goggles up onto her forehead, cocking an eyebrow.
The Mist. It was waiting for us this time. Mommy.
Rydia called out, feeling the condensation from the mist cling to her eyelashes as she blinked in a fruitless effort to see better.
I've returned.
The mist began to retreat all around them like the trough of a tidal wave, withdrawing into a spiraling galaxy of light over the pond that marked Adeline's final resting place. The shriek of a dragon reverberated into the air, and the mist burst into holy droplets of sapphire light, revealing before them the ethereal pearl-scaled dragon that had once protected Mist Village, before Cecil and Cain had accidentally slain it, along with Adeline, 17 years ago.
My mother's dragon.
Rydia gasped, clapping her hands to her mouth.
So the mysterious girl never managed to find you. Even though you were here in plain sight all along.
A door to one of the houses suddenly flew open, and a pile of children poured out, along with a few other villagers Rydia recognized, and the village elder himself. They ran over to Rydia in an excited stampede, the children practically climbing over themselves in their rush to give her a hug. Rydia spun around dizzily at all the smiling faces as small arms grasped at her legs and waist, her eyes wide.
You're all still here. It looks like you freed the Eidolons.
The elder nodded, and Rydia held her tongue, deciding now was not the time to get into semantics. Not all of the Eidolons, but...
I have, sir. But how come only my mother's dragon wasn't captured, out of all the Eidolons? That would be the work of these children.
The elder smiled, and the boy currently hugging Rydia grinned up at her.
Haha. What?
Rydia blinked.
I'm afraid I don't understand.
The elder patted the boy's shoulder once he had pulled away from a stunned Rydia.
We villagers cannot communicate with the Eidolons like you.
A man that Rydia recognized as the grumpy septuagenarian that ran the inn stepped forward.
But the powers they're all the same. And these children hold it within their bodies.
One of the teenage girls that lived next door to Rydia nodded.
We have only a small fraction of your power, but we still pooled what we had to protect the village while you were away, and used the Mist Dragon's powers to conceal him from evil. So this was all you're doing?
Rydia gasped, and another little boy nodded.
We had a big discussion about it. And we decided we had to save your mom's dragon, at the very least. He protected our village, after all.
The teenager smiled.
None of us would be here today if it wasn't for the motherly summoner's dragon. We owe everything to him.
Rydia shook her head, her eyes watering.
I think I understand now. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me. But I'm so grateful for everything you've done. We'll be cheering for you, Rydia,
a little girl said.
So please come home again soon, okay? Okay.
Rydia nodded, the tears spilling over her cheeks.
I'll be home as soon as everything is better, I promise.
The children's parents gently pulled the kids out of the way as Rydia ran toward the pond, her arms outstretched. The dragon reared its head back and cried out, another shower of dazzling holy rain sprinkling over the village. Rydia took a flying leap, landing on the dragon's back and throwing her arms around his long, serpentine neck as she closed her eyes.
I missed you so much. Thank the gods you were protected this whole time.
Rydia whimpered. The dragon turned his snout, snorting gently into Rydia's hair as he rested his maw upon the crown of her head.
Rydia,
a gentle voice sang into her ear, drifting around her comfortingly like a blanket warmed by an open fire.
Mommy.
Rydia sniveled, her eyes snapping open. The dragon lifted his head, staring curiously into the sky.
You have done everything you can for the Eidolons for now. You will have to seek darkness and starlight in order to save the others. But do not rest just yet, your friends are fighting for the Eidolons and their lives as we speak, and desperately need your help. Those Eidolons you have gathered will light the path for you, you need only to ask. Of course. The barrier to Baron Castle can now be shattered.
Rydia gasped.
We'll make haste for Baron right away. You must never forget, Rydia, just as I am always with the people of Mist, so shall I always be with you.
The dragon let out another cry as Adeline's voice faded away, dipping his head into the garden that surrounded her grave and gently nipping at a blossom of massive blood-red hyacinths that were exploding in riotous blooms among the other rainbow of flowers. He turned his head back to Rydia, gently dropping the severed flower in her outstretched hands, dazzling drops of his holy mist sprinkled along the petals like morning dew. Thank you. Rydia sniffled to herself, reaching up and carefully tucking the flower behind her ear. In a burst of glittering light, the dragon disappeared, and Rydia slowly floated back to the shore, scintillating mist guiding her body safely over the pond. When her feet touched land once more, she found Edge waiting for her a few feet away, the man in black and Luca hanging back at the village entrance among the townspeople. He extended his hand toward her, a small, but kind, smile set on his lips. He knew how painful this next part was going to be, how much everyone on the Falcon had been dreading this next confrontation as equally as they had been anticipating it.
Ready to go, Rydia?
Rydia laced her fingers with his, pushing up on her tiptoes so she could gaze directly into his eyes, if only for a few precious stolen moments. She had never noticed it until now, but was startled to realize that in the light of that dreaded moon, Edge's eyes were the same color as the holy mist Adeline's dragon had rained upon her flower. Reveling in the quiet joy this brought her, Rydia squeezed his hand once, her eyes alit with the first throes of true happiness she had felt in days.
Absolutely. Now, off to Cecil's castle.
Edge nodded, and they simultaneously dropped hands, Edge turning to lead them back to the village gates. As Rydia drifted behind him, she turned one last time to say goodbye to her mother's grave, her heart hammering against her breast as she pressed the fingers that had been entwined with Edge's to her lips. I took one route. And you took another. The wind at our backs. But now our paths have converged once again. Are we too bound by fate? Or am I just taking another detour? Baron. Cecil took a hesitant step forward, like he wasn't quite sure where to go, his breathing haggard as the panic began to settle into his glassy, vacant stare that seemed to burn right through Theodore. Rosa backed away from him on her hands and knees, her lower lip trembling as he towered unsteadily over her, drowning her in his shadow. Theodore spun around to see what his father could possibly be staring at, but there was no one else there other than Cain and himself. Cecil lifted one hand to his lips, still ice blue, releasing an ear-splitting scream into his fingers as he sank to his knees.
Why, my lord?
And with that, his eyes rolled in the back of his head, a final scream tearing from his throat before he tumbled forward, Ragnarok shattering into hundreds of glittering shards as it slipped from his grip and crashed to the floor next to him. Rosa's eyes widened as she took in his collapsed form and the fractured remains of his holy sword, cupping her hands over her mouth before releasing a scream of her own.
Cecil. No.
The mysterious girl's eyebrows shot up, her nose crinkling in disgust as she climbed to her feet on Cecil's throne. No matter. You fools will all soon realize that what just transpired here was pointless. End of chapter.